Once the insight that the Palm murder has been a direct cover-up of the murder, just minutes after the shots on Svevagen fell, and then been a fake investigation that has been going on for almost 40 years, then comes the question of how to find out what actually happened, and which people one can draw credible information and decisive details from. It is also what will later ring in who were involved in events on the murder evening, and what probably happened. Fortunately, when one understands that it is about a cover-up and a fake investigation, one can first focus on the information from all the whistleblowers, who have marked the investigation over the years. Those who have brought forward concrete information without for that matter needing to buy their own conclusions about what happened and who were involved. Which is a very important distinction in the investigative work that is the basis for this film. Drawing important, relevant, and factual information from different informants does not necessarily mean that one assumes that everything these people contributed with, or their sometimes unreasonable assumptions and conclusions they come with, is true. Here there is an enormous flora of honorable people who have refused to go along with authorities, politicians, and media's manipulations, threats, diminutions, and character assassinations. People who dedicated the rest of their lives to fighting and challenging the Swedish establishment windmill. Among others, a police commissioner, Gösta Söderström, who was the first on the scene and who had to deal with the events around the murder scene. A commissioner who for the rest of his life claimed that the alarm for the event went out about 6 minutes after the official information and about 9 minutes after the shots were fired, and that he had time to get information about the event when he was stopped by a private person on an adjacent street in the city who several minutes before had fled from the scene and from the murderer. The person who many years after his death came to be the subject of an accusation as Prime Minister murderer in connection with the investigation being closed in 2020. We have the fantastic journalist Sven Einar who dug up that Hans Holmer, who led the cover-up initially, never was in Borlänge during the murder night as he lied about when he stepped into the investigation the day after the murder and took over the helm in the fake investigation. We also have Holmer's chauffeur who in an interview stated that he drove past the murder scene, just 7 minutes after the shots, with Holmer in the car. Just here there are incredibly many early contradictions that show that information from different people cannot be combined, and from an investigative perspective, it is precisely here that the answers are when one understands how to dig further in investigative work. Einar is also the person who has brought forward information that a person who looked for a liquor store near the murder scene, days before the murder told that he met just County Police Chief Holmer and Sapo Chief PG Nass, who were seen reconnoitering at Tunnelgaten. This information is of course completely decisive to understand that there was already a planned activity for the murder evening, even if it absolutely did not need to be about the murder itself. But that it is here that one can draw far-reaching conclusions that both Sapo and Holmer, as responsible for police in Stockholm, have planned for an activity on the murder evening that is covered by the then top-secret NATO organization Stay Behind. Which is also confirmed by information on the murder evening about walkie-talkie observations, at the murder scene itself, already earlier in the evening, that give clear evidence that it was a planned upcoming activity just at that place before the couple even walked past. We also have fantastic information from a TV producer, Lars Krantz, who ended up in a strange situation on a bus on the way home during the murder night and involved just one of the police who then became identified as one of those who was involved in the exercise on the murder evening. Something that Krantz drove so far in his conviction that he was fined for defamation when the covering establishment went after the accusation from Krantz. But Krantz also dug up the important information from friends of the Palm couple's son Martin, that he already a week before the murder stated that he could not join a celebration of a friend, because he had already planned to go to the cinema just on the murder evening, and see exactly the film that the Palm couple, son Martin, and his girlfriend actually went and saw a week later. This information also overturns the official narrative that the cinema visit was not planned at all until the last minute. Precisely in line with them having mistaken the time for the film's start time and therefore happened to be there a quarter before it started, which obviously only was about that being the time that applied to pick up already pre-booked tickets before they were released for regular sale. This too became a post-constructed truth, from the covering Palm fake investigation that has been hammered in to the population for almost 40 years. Yet another important information in connection with the murder itself has come from journalist Peter Ekstrand, who was out working in the city this evening with a number of polices. According to his information, they happened to pass the murder scene shortly after the murder, and when the police he traveled with stepped out and asked what had happened, they only got information that there had been a knife fight at the scene. So nothing about it being Sweden's prime minister who had been shot, and that they needed help to search for the murderer. Ekstrand became so shocked when he later that night got information from some girls about what had happened and who had been affected. It further confirms that the cover-up around the murder began very shortly after the shots, and was thus limited to a very small group who had been involved in the events on the murder evening. We also have a police, Eva Karlowitz-Borg, who worked at the crime duty during the murder night, and she and her colleagues were thus not allowed to tell anyone that Olof Palme had been shot. Eva, who over 30 years after the event still does not understand why. Many circumstances around the investigation were also noticed by honorable people who strangely enough did not get to be involved in the actual work. We have the prosecutor K.G. Svensson, who became involved as preliminary investigation leader in the case but was completely opposed by investigation leader Holmer, who would lead the fake investigation and cover up with an iron fist. K.G. Svensson became completely convinced that the bullets found days after the murder, in strange places, where previous technicians had already searched, could never have lain there, and suspected that they had been placed there afterward, by the fake investigation. K.G. Svensson even tried to get investigations of the facades to see if it really matched the bullets found place, which revealingly Holmer completely opposed. Holmer refused to cooperate with the prosecutor, and finally complained so much to the government that K.G. Svensson had to leave the case. But it was anyway then K.G. Svensson on his own initiative who wanted the two guys who could give one of the deliberately and intentionally accused person, Gunnarsson, alibi for the time of the murder and therefore completely write him off from the case. Something that Holmer and other police had refused to do, despite the information about the guys having come forward in interrogations with Gunnarsson. That the bullets really were placed there and had nothing to do with the murder was also admitted by the chief of the technical section himself, Vincent Lang, in connection with him retiring. An information he strangely backed away from when he obviously was taken by the ear. As everyone understands, there have been people, in and around the investigation, who have provided information and described how they have been treated by the innermost circle, which makes that already here there are many honorable people to draw important information and details from. But above all, this explains the deliberate cover-up that has marked the investigation already after the shots fell on Svivagen. But there are also many innocent witnesses and others drawn in, who have been affected over the years, whom we must also focus on.